Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K Collector, and like many of you, we're getting ready to put up our Christmas tree and some of our holiday ornaments around the house just to kind of bring out that Christmas spirit. But today I want to talk about the concept of retro video games being a hobby for grown man children or old men. And this is something that I've seen said a few times. And I kind of want to talk about the validity of this statement and really kind of break down if it's true or not, and what it means for the hobby in the future, if in fact this is a hobby that's pretty much dominated by middle-aged to older gentlemen. Now, when you look at retro video games and the last resurgence in the interest of retro video games, the last resurgence that we saw in retro video games happened obviously around 2020. And you would have to have been blind to say that only old men were interested in it at the time, because clearly YouTube showed that there were plenty of younger men in their teens and early 20s who were very much interested in retro video games and finding them, hunting them, picking them up, buying them. And they were using all the various channels to get their hands on retro games, whether it was eBay, yard sales, thrift stores. It was all the rage, and that's okay. But what we're seeing here at the end of 2025 is, I don't want to say an absolute reversal of that, but we're definitely not seeing the same level of enthusiasm from the younger generation, from the younger crowd. And I kind of want to first talk about why I think that is and what I think sparked the interest in 2020. Well, it's the same thing that has sparked the interest in a lot of people when it comes to Pokemon cards. There was a financial incentive when it came to getting into the hobby of retro games during the time of 2020, 2021, and 2022. And so if you were a young man in your teens and 20s and you had more time than money, then retro video games or hunting for retro video games and finding them at really cheap prices seemed like a really good way of getting a solid return on your time investment when it came to hunting for retro games. And not only were, I think, younger people getting into it for the financial gain, but it was also a very cool thing to talk about, especially on YouTube. So if you were a younger gentleman and you were out there hunting and buying retro video games, then it was a good opportunity for you to kind of start a YouTube channel, start a TikTok channel, and really grow an audience based off of a hobby and a topic that was really, really hot at the time. And obviously, the nostalgia factor of it all also played a big role, because not only were you capturing a younger audience with the kind of shiny object syndrome, which led people to believe that they could make a lot of money doing this, but you also attracted that older audience of men and women who remembered these games from their childhood. And so it was an easy way to grow a really large base and a large following on YouTube, and really kind of also kickstart a really strong side hustle at the time. And so you definitely could see the financial incentive being a really big factor and a really big driver when it came to younger people really being engaged and really being enthralled with the hobby. And that's why you saw that interest back then. And that's why you saw a lot of younger people even at retro gaming conventions, and really kind of getting back into some of the old school games and old school ideas and original Mario and things like that. And obviously that younger people getting into those older games definitely helped to drive a lot of those franchises that are still relevant today via the Switch. And so I think that was, the financial aspect was probably a big factor into what drove young people or younger people into the hobby, especially around the time of 2020. Now, I'm not saying that young people weren't into retro games before 2020, and I'm not saying that there hasn't been a history of younger people being into retro games, period. But what I'm saying is that the financial incentive drew in a lot of speculators. It drew in a lot of grifters. It drew in a lot of people who ordinarily probably would not have been, remotely interested in, Nintendo games and Super Nintendo games. But because there was this financial factor and this financial aspect to it, now more and more of those young people were getting into those games. Now, what you've seen in 2025 is that there is still a strong base of younger individuals that are very much into retro still. And when I say young, I'm saying anywhere between like 18 and maybe 25-ish, right? Like if you're 18 to 25 and you're still very much into like Nintendo and Super Nintendo and PlayStation and N64, well, you're pretty much a really young generation, right? Because anything, anything before Gen 6 was really before your time. Because if you're 25, that means you were born in the year 2000, which was the year of the sixth generation, right? So Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, PlayStation 1, N64 really wouldn't have any type of nostalgic impact on you, because even if you were born during the year of the Dreamcast, like let's say you were born in 2000, or 1999 for that matter, if you were born at that time, by the time you were old enough to even recognize what a video game was, it probably would have been closer to 2008, 2010. And by that time, we were well into the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, and you probably were not reaching back to put your hands on an original PlayStation or N64 or anything of that nature, unless you were living in a household with someone who already had those consoles. So the reason why I classify the younger generation, that's the reason why I classify young as someone between the ages of like maybe 17, 18 to maybe 24, 25, because anything pre-Gen 6, you're just really not going to have any personal memories with it or any recollection to it. If you're 25 now, your memories with video games probably really begin with like the 360, the PS3, PS4, and Switch, right? And so for that generation, the 18 to 25, the young men and young women for that matter who fall into that age bracket that are still interested in retro games to this day, from what I'm seeing is it's really the only ones that are left are the ones that are in it for some type of financial incentive. Maybe they started a reselling business during 2020 and maybe they were able to find some success. And so now here in 2025, they're still engaged in and actively involved with retro video games, right? So they're still buying them, they're still selling them, they're still trading them, but they're not really sitting down and spending a Saturday afternoon playing 2 hours of Ghouls and Ghosts or Top Gear or Final Fight 3, right? They're really not into it for that reason. They're really just kind of into it for the monetary side. And if they do have an interest or an itch to play any type of retro video games, odds are they're probably just going to some type of Nintendo Switch online service and they're playing their retro games that way, or maybe they're emulating, but they're not really investing a lot of time into picking up the original hardware. And so that leads us to the question of, well, then who is, right? Like who is actually sitting at home playing retro video games on original hardware aside from the Y2K collector? And I think you would have to say that it probably is folks who are probably in their mid 30s to late 40s, right? So if you're someone who's in, you're 35 or above, you do have some type of personal memories with maybe the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, maybe even the Nintendo, right? You're old enough to remember the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance, and you're able to kind of draw back and harken back to memories that you had with these systems as a child. And so there's something a little bit more tangible in it for you when it comes to you engaging in the hobby of retro video games, right? You actually want to sit down and play them. You enjoy the music, listening to the music, listening to the sound effects, listening to the voiceovers on those PlayStation 1 games or on those N64 games. They bring you back to a very nostalgic time. And so I think, if you are someone who is playing video games on original hardware, that's pretty much what's in it for you. And you're probably not someone who's 18 or 25. You're more than likely going to be someone who's in their, like I said, in their mid 30s, anywhere into your late 40s. And so looking at it from that perspective, it make sense to a degree when folks say that retro video games is really like a middle-aged to old man hobby. And let's just face it, once you kind of hit 30, you hit unk status, and once you're over 35, you're just considered old. And if you're 35 listening to this and it offends you, this is the reality. An 18-year-old looks at you like you're old if you're 35. To them, you're old. And I only know that because when I was 18, someone who told me that they were 35, I thought they were old too. Right. And now that you're 35, you're like, well, wait, I'm not 60 yet, so I'm not old. Now you're looking at like 50 and 60 years old. But for the purposes of this conversation, yeah, if you're 35 and older, you're old. Right. And so this is where the idea of retro video games being an old man hobby comes into play. Now, What does this all mean for the future? If this is an old man hobby, does this mean that the future of retro video games is doomed? Should we assume that once Gen X and the millennial generation passes, that all of these things will fade into oblivion? I'll leave you guys to answer that in the comments down below, because I know there's a wide range of opinions on this. There are many of you who feel like once Gen X and the millennials hit old age and can no longer play these games, many of you feel like this hobby will die. It will, in fact, fade away into the land of obscurity. But then there are others who feel like there is a generation coming up behind us that will keep these retro games alive, and not just these games to be emulated, but the hardware and the discs and the consoles as well. But I'm interested to know your thoughts on this. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.